So modern technology is empowering, it's amazing, and it's connected us in ways that we'd probably get into trouble with our ancestors. They would accuse us of being supernatural. But to many of us, we owe our livelihoods to the new technologies. And one of the biggest inventions of our time was, of course, the internet. And as of July, nearly 70% of the entire global population have some form of access to the internet. That's over 5.5 billion people. In Canada alone, 95% of the population has access to the internet in some way. And so in some ways, it's a crowning achievement of humanity. Today, when you reach into your pocket, you can take out a device that's literally millions of times more powerful than the original computers that got us to space. And that's really incredible. Think of all the things we can do with these new tools. And even our access to the internet is substantially greater than just 10 years ago, when only 37.4% had access in 2014. But what about when these technologies distance us from others? Is that still valuable technology? Does it make it evil? Should we avoid it? In 2023, the US Surgeon General issued an advisory that explicitly said loneliness and isolation is a public health crisis. This was a pretty important moment because usually those advisories are reserved for the most significant public health issues that we face. Other organizations like the World Health Organization followed up shortly after that, and there were others that preceded that advisory as well. And so more and more people are dedicating resources and recognizing loneliness as a severe issue for our generations. And as technology evolves very quickly, it's becoming clear that these new technologies don't come without a cost. The physical distance is being broken down every day. We can call relatives or friends anywhere on the planet. But despite being more connected, we're considerably more lonely. AI is poised to impact humanity at a similar scale to that of the internet. The internet recently turned 40 years old, and we still don't know the true impact of the technologies that the internet makes possible. But we have a good idea of generally where to look. And we're already noticing some really severe negative impacts of AI. Some recent studies, specifically one done by MIT, found that with higher overall daily use across all modalities, so conversation types, whether it's voice or text, that they can be correlated with higher loneliness, dependence, more problematic use, and even lower socialization. So while AI can increase our efficiency and it also reduces the number of opportunities for us to have micro interactions with other humans. And especially with children and people who are still developing, this is extremely important for understanding how to work with others, have self-confidence, knowledge, personality, think for yourself. So writing research papers, especially with young people, it doesn't actually require them to read a book at the library in some cases if they use the technology incorrectly. Or for me, it was a CD with an entire encyclopedia replaced this big, the need to have a big bookshelf with a whole row of books on there that were thick and heavy and mostly just collected dust. But I mentioned in some cases, people don't have to think critically at all. They can just, instead of plagiarizing someone directly, they can have some thoughtful questions, and AI can come up with something that they can use. So how do we deal with these new barriers that innovations create? And how can we more carefully adopt these exciting new technologies without creating new pitfalls or falling behind? Another remarkable achievement for humanity was coordinating distributed collaboration without traditional social structures. And we call this open source today. The open source movement is really a testament to the power of human generosity and our desire to share and collaborate with others. Human connections are such a critical part of the open source concept. If we're more lonely and less likely to interact as a society, how does this impact our open source communities? Will using AI amplify those larger trends like early research shows? Will it damage open source in general? There's open source technology on, just like the computer that was on the moon, there were open source technologies on that and still power rockets and pioneering initiatives today. If you spend any time participating in open source, you quickly realize that there can be many reasons why a project succeeds or fails. But there's usually one in particular that is present in the most successful open source communities as projects as the most successful, most important. Open source is ultimately a place where people go to call home. They come to collaborate, participate, and at the heart of all successful open source projects is a community that cares deeply about that project, the values, the mission, and each other at some level. We don't just want our problems solved, we want to be seen as we're solving them and participate and create bonds with those that we solve them with. Specifically in WordPress, this community is comprised of thousands of developers, designers, polyglots, testers, educators, marketers, and even our users. Each contributor is responsible for one of the many pieces that make up this massive puzzle that's WordPress. So how do we retain the open source spirit as we introduce yet another layer of separation between us and the software, our users, the others we collaborate with? AI certainly does not care about the impact that it has on those things. But we must be responsible for looking after these things. We should ask questions like, where do contributors expect human interaction? Where is their non-negotiable interactions that need to happen with humans? Where can it be used to guide humans through situations instead of replace them entirely? And how can we use AI tools for our own use, but recognize when those tools are not necessarily great for larger communities? So this has been a little dark so far, but let's come back. I'm very excited about AI, and I have to say that it's going, like I said, it's going to impact us at a large scale, like the internet has, in my opinion. There's a few specific things that I'm most excited about with it, and I'll get to those in a little bit. But it's important that we keep in mind to balance and carefully think through everything that we're considering. So I found, preparing for this slide, I was doing a little bit of research in the form of just looking up definitions and seeing what these tools are actually defined as and what are the accepted standardized definitions for what we have. When I talk about AI today, I'm going to specifically be referring to large language models. I kind of call that personal use AI because it's what we interact with the most. Other things that we interact with are more seamless, like neural network type stuff, or maybe when you go to the doctor, they're using AI to analyze some imagery. But again, in the context of the tools that we use within open source right now, those are mostly large language models. It's easy to see AI as this magical solution, but what is AI as we really know it deep down today? So this is one definition for large language model that I found was interesting. And then I went a little bit further and I looked at what the generally accepted definitions for just language model was. Models must be pre-trained. These are the parts of the definitions that I kind of stood out to me. The second part that stood out is that language models are merely trying to predict and generate plausible language. They're not creating sentences. They're just trying to figure out what makes the most sense from the data that they have and that they're trained by. The entire human experience is not available as consumable data. So what about languages that are spoken only? They're not available in written form because they don't actually have characters to represent their words. What about emotional depth that we feel all the time in our human interactions? What about cultures that are not well documented or studied at all? What about our consciousness and our persistent self of being the same person over time? For model, I went a step further and There were 11 definitions in the dictionary, and it was interesting that many of them could go home and do this exercise as well, but I found that many of them could be applied to AI loosely, and there are a few that I found the most interesting. And then the other thing that stood out to me is that many of them could be applied to both humans and AI. And that's when it gets a little bit interesting. And what I found was that I kept arriving at this realization that the AI that we know, even though it's communicating to us in a human way, essentially is just solving a series of math problems. They're language models, and humans are the standard that is trying to be imitated. Many of the concepts that we have around our existence can be boiled down to mathematic formulas, but most of them can't. Again, morality, desires, conscience, all of these things we can't represent with ones and zeros. So how can AI accurately consider these factors when they're producing these plausible languages? Perhaps for these cultures and languages that are undocumented entirely, they would see them as totally implausible and never be a realistic way to perceive the world. They could even deny their existence entirely. But in the end, the human soul is not a math problem. AI is only currently analyzing human history as it exists in data. And it's making new discoveries that are shaping our future, but it's not yet charting our future itself. So when AI reads something and it's trying to perform mathematical analysis, the same thing is true when humans read something. But they're also not restricted to solely what has been. They can also take into account personal experiences, their culture, their core beliefs, and all of the things that make us unique in who we are. Communities at large also have these beliefs and missions, and democratizing publishing. We have project philosophies. And again, AI cannot replace the way that we personally analyze those things, at least not yet. And hopefully they see my talk and know that, heard that slide about I like AI. In the context of software, I try to look at AI as a new and really, really good form of automation that's flexible. This can be very helpful to frame it. By framing it this way, it's very helpful to guide you into making decisions about good versus bad AI usage. There's a great book called Producing Open Source that I recommend anybody interested in open source communities go read. It's by Carl Fogel. And he introduces a concept in one of the chapters called the automation ratio. And essentially, it's that if someone has to repeat a task, it's worth at least 10 times the amount of effort to automate that task than it is for someone to do it once. He goes on to say that very frequent or complex tasks, that ratio could easily go up to 20 or higher. Sometimes individual developers are too wrapped up in the low-level work to see the big picture and realize that by performing these automatable tasks manually, frequently, we're wasting a considerable amount of time. So here, the term automation is used pretty broadly, and it's any repeatable action where one or two things could change over time, but any sort of technical infrastructure that assists humans. Taking steps eliminates not merely waste, but it can also eliminate the potential frustration when someone makes a small mistake, especially when things have strict guidelines and are deterministic. That's what computers were really invented for, and that's what we do as engineers and programmers. We define those guidelines. And even though this book was from over a decade ago, it's still very relevant in many aspects of open source. But I found this section to be relevant specifically to AI because AI, again, is solving deterministic problems based on your prompts that you write and the data that it has available to it and trying to accomplish the tasks that you're asking of it. Each and every time we propose changes to the code base, they're always examined carefully. We'll ask questions like, what problems is this solving? How prominent is this problem? How many people is this problem affecting? What is the demand for this feature? How does it help our end users? We also consider things like the opportunity cost. That's a concept where if you put your focus on any one specific thing, in some way you're drawing attention away from another problem. So we experienced this during the lead up to WordPress 5.0 in the form of the block editor. There was a particularly high opportunity cost to draw anyone's attention away from that effort to get that block editor ready for prime time. And so there were very few other features that got attention in that year leading up to the block editor. So in that case, it was not worth the opportunity cost to draw people away. And our tools can do the same thing. By working on these tools, they may not be solving an important enough problem, and it might be distracting us from priorities for a release or any other initiatives that can have a greater impact. In general, the best ideas are always well scoped and practical. They're rooted in real-world user problems. They're maintainable, testable, and ultimately compatible with the project's philosophies and roadmap. The same should be true for any tools that we consider to help with our automation and even our communities. In these scenarios, the members of our community are our users. Consuming or distracting our contributors are a few of the opportunity costs here. Implementing an AI bot or something that generally provides not a high level of value, it's essentially going to just take time away from contributors to acknowledge that or review the comment, make sure it's correct. And while it's very tempting to choose all these new shiny tools and implement them quickly, we need to resist that temptation and spend a bit more time building consensus that it's a good change, be impartial about the tools that we're evaluating, and again, determining how it best solves that problem. The other thing to consider is that no tool is free. This can be monetary, but it can also be from a maintenance perspective. When you introduce a new tool, what is the level of maintenance required? After considering that cost, is there even a net positive benefit? Is it only that specific tool presenting a net negative benefit, or is solving that problem in general a net negative benefit? And maybe that's not the right problem to solve. Perhaps just wait until a couple more years. The great thing is that no is not forever, but yes is. So once you commit something, especially in WordPress with backwards compatibility, we say yes to something where we're committed to maintaining that and not breaking sites by removing it or changing it in certain ways. And so no is very easy to revisit, but again, yes has longer consequences. Another thing to consider is, what are the greater factors at play? What happens if the AI demand skyrockets even more exponentially than it has recently, and our utility grids are stressed, and the providers have no choice but to extremely hike rates in order to tame the demand? If you are 100% dependent on certain tools, what does that mean for the reliability of your software, the contributing experience? Can people even contribute at all if something is too expensive anymore? And what's the cost to spend the time to disable that or remove that? Despite being more lonely and more avoidant, it's still our human nature to long for interactions with others. Participating in open source can be really humbling. You need to have a willingness to be vulnerable. You're working in public. What if you're wrong? Everybody will see that you were wrong or made a mistake. Imposter syndrome can be very real and sometimes is even more amplified in open source. But I hate to tell you this, but in reality, nobody actually cares. Nobody. I can say that as I look at patches and I find mistakes. It's not. I don't view it as. It's not. It doesn't affect the way I see someone in general. As long as those people are open to learning and they are taking feedback, open to feedback, you can always know that they're going to improve. And that's always the goal in good communities, is to help everybody improve. But nonetheless, it's very scary. How would you feel if you observed an open source community for several weeks, maybe even years, and it took that long to finally understand how things worked and work up the courage to submit a bug request or submit a patch? How would you feel if the first interaction you have is from an LLM? Would you be disappointed? I would be. I feel very strongly that the first and the last interaction should always be humans. I don't feel that closing things using AI or in an automated way is helpful. While it might clean up your backlog or lower the number of tickets that you have, ultimately it's not benefiting the people in your community that are participating. As I mentioned, it's quite scary to participate, especially for the first few times in open source. And so not only engaging this person as a human is respectful, it's an acknowledgement that they receive and they feel seen, welcome, like they belong. Automated responses can feel disingenuous. We don't have time to respond to you, so we've set up this LLM to do it for us. In any healthy community, you will never feel like you're unwelcome or like you're an inefficiency that is being dealt with. And also, it won't fix the issue, because if you don't have a reason to implement that, would be that new tickets are going a long amount of time without receiving a response. But implementing an AI to respond to that doesn't really do anything to fix that. It's still going to sit there. They're going to get that disingenuous response, and they're going to get probably even more frustrated that nobody circles back to answer them. When you go into something expecting a specific outcome, it's always disappointing to have an experience that's the opposite. Genuine interactions that meet our expectations are one of the most important contributing factors to strong relationships and communities. So instead of forcing AI on members of our community, maybe the best approach is to allow them to configure the level of AI that they are interested in receiving. This allows them to cater and communicate their expectations to shape their experiences with the community they are involved with in the way that they would like it to be. So maybe someone could choose to enable Copilot on their pull requests or not. They could choose to maybe when their pull requests are drafts, they could receive AI feedback. But once it's ready for review, they would switch to only receiving human feedback. All of those are just some small ideas that you could use to shape how your community is interacting with the tooling that you implement. While you shouldn't lose sight of the fact that most software, especially WordPress, is end-user focused, when it comes to democratizing publishing, this has meant humans for many years. We usually expect our users to be humans, but robots and AI are also users too. When you strip down a website to the bare basics, you find HTML. And HTML at the core is a structured markup language with a defined syntax that computers can systematically parse and intercept. It's predictable, it's semantic, and of course this has been true since the very beginning of the internet. Since then, many other technologies have been introduced, like RSS, XML, REST, JSON, and as they are created to solve specific problems, they each have their own goals, but they all have been done so in a standardized way. They also do so in a way that machines can consume that data and interact with it, and of course process it in a way that it can be displayed to people and users. In the case of AI, this should be no different. The common approach currently is to use an MCP server, which at its core uses the JSON RPC protocol. While this talk is focused on how we implement AI tools in our contributor workflows and communities, we should ensure that our community processes and history are also accessible by both humans and machines. Otherwise, MCP servers and other AI tools may end up missing substantial chunks of history, data that could be used to produce more accurate results that can ultimately help us and be more useful. It's pretty naive to say that contributors never churn out of open source projects. Contributors change jobs, they change interests, they have life situations that change. Perhaps they have always contributed in their free time and now they have a family that requires more of their attention. Companies change tech stacks. And while that's unfortunate, while it is unfortunate, contributors do burn out. As a maintainer of any code base, it's important to have the historical context readily available without having to spend hours digging through history and conversations. In the WordPress project, one of the main ways we do that is through our commit messages. These are the guidelines as laid out in the WordPress core handbook. But basically, the commit messages are used to convey a handful of things about specific changes that are made. They provide a lot of context, and that context can be very helpful in the future. They also document any considerations that may have been made that lead up to the given change. And it's not just for the present users of the software and people building the software, but it's also for the future. As a committer, I spend a large amount of time digging through commit messages to understand why the code I'm about to change is existing in the current state. What problems were solved on the way to getting the code to this state. What considerations were made before finalizing these changes. Understanding these things help to ensure that no regressions are introduced or that we don't repeat past mistakes. One of the most important sentences in this section to me is that they describe the what and the why of the change set and not necessarily the how. The how is described in the actual changes of the code itself. AI is really great at figuring out the what part and explaining the how, but frequently it struggles with the why. Why is this being done and why is it important? And this, for humans, trying to understand things is arguably the most important part of that. The other piece I found that was interesting is it also calls out multiple audiences. Future contributors and computers were two of those examples. By writing descriptive, thorough commit messages where we were intending to help humans, but even a decade plus ago when this was put in place, since then we've essentially been helping to train AI models to be more efficient without even realizing that that's what we would be doing in the future. As I mentioned, AI cannot replace humans, and so naturally it cannot fix people problems. In general, AI should not be making decisions. Humans, in the end, are maintainers and not AI. And all of that is because of those aspects of humanity that we can't actually present in data. We can't ensure that the model will consider all of the necessary aspects and perform the right critical thinking, because in the end it's just math problems. It can be used to provide summaries or present possible issues or compatibilities that we can use to consider in our decision making. But humans should always be performing that final analysis of all the information available to test and confirm the strength of the presented rationale when making the decision. AI will not, most importantly, not solve any bottlenecks that may exist at this stage of the change lifecycle. That makes it even more important to implement AI thoughtfully in our communities. If AI is used in a way that damages the contributor pipeline, it will eliminate ways that beginner contributors can participate and grow. It will eliminate mentorship opportunities between senior and junior contributors. We could end up slamming the door in the faces of those people who are very competent and interested and capable of becoming future maintainers potentially. And I know it said it can't, but it can fix some human problems. These are the instances that I'm most excited about that I mentioned with AI. WordPress, unfortunately, is not easy to contribute to if you are non-English. I think that 57% of all WordPress sites now are non-English. And so we have an incredibly wide-reaching user base that's not necessarily fluent in English or understands English. Especially where even where they're needed to participate in a multilingual way, like translations, you have to know English to be able to use the translation interfaces. It's a little, I know, it seems silly, but again, in general, the WordPress project is, by default, is an English US language. But what if you could submit a bug report in any language and it was automatically translated into the language that someone else has configured as their preference? How many more contributors would participate? If 1% of the users of the software that powers 43% of the internet tried to contribute, but were not fluent in English, that's thousands of people. How much greater could our software be with their input and their help? Consider WordCamps. What if every WordCamp took place in the native local tongue? How many more people would be drawn to it from that local area? With AI providing live translations like the new Apple AirPods software, language doesn't even really matter. You can participate in any language. You can travel to anywhere and not have to study with Duolingo, though you should. And I aspire to, but don't do great with that. I struggle with picking up new languages. And so having these tools available to me and others is really, has high potential to be impactful. What if anyone attended any WordCamp and just spoke whatever language they wanted, even in the hallway tracks or in sessions, and everybody would be able to just understand it? Different cultures communicate in different ways. Some are more dry and direct, and others perceive that to be rude. What if there was a way to have AI translate our communication styles into more neutral phrasing? It could help prevent misunderstandings, better understand the intentions behind our contributions. All of these are ways that we can enhance the human experience by creating new pathways for connections and allowing more people to participate. When we implement these new technologies thoughtfully and intentionally, we can strengthen our communities as well as sustain them in ways that, like the impacts of the internet, we don't yet understand and can't anticipate. We never hear, we have too many contributors or maintainers. And so the great thing about AI is we can make use of it to get more people to help us. When we look at these tools, also we should consider, do they align with our ideals, our philosophies, our mission to democratize publishing, or open source ideals in general? One of the main things that we consider when we are looking at libraries that we should merge into core or use for certain features is how they align with this project's ideals. And the same should be true for the AI tools that we use. Remember that in the end, AI is technology that's just posing as a human. And our brains are tricked to believing that facade in a similar way to how we lose sight of the fact that there are humans on the other side of the screen. These in-person events are extremely valuable in that sense that it's a great way to rehumanize those people and those connections that we have. Going back to Carl Fogel's book, he also says another thing, that we should beware of the temptation to over-automate, because that what makes free software project work is the care and the intelligent expression of that care by the humans that are involved. Open source is a place where people come to belong, to participate, collaborate with others. The technical infrastructure isn't really about giving humans easy opportunities to apply care. Open source may not be valuable or attractive to some if those opportunities go missing. You need to be able to see yourself in community. We need to have different representations present. We need to take stock in what's important to us and to you and your peers. What helped us achieve the success that we have? How did we get where we are? And how can we preserve that? Things to think about as you implement AI in your daily projects and life are all of these things that I've discussed. Be sure that they're the right tools and that you're willing to stand by them. In most cases, you won't have to force a technology, but there are instances where you do need to force a change because you believe it's the right thing to do. It's also in our nature to resist change. And so you might encounter resistance when adding new AI tools. But again, be confident in why you're doing it and what you're trying to accomplish and solve. And don't be afraid or weary of AI in the end. Embrace this new technology, but firmly protect our communities while we're doing so. Thank you. All right, I made it.
We have a couple of minutes for questions.
Yes, it works for me.
Just a couple though.
That's okay. Yep.
Thoughts about open source AI projects, including the ones being funded by the Mozilla Corporation?
Yes, I think that open source AI projects are a great potential way that we can put AI into core. And so those are run mostly in your browser. They don't rely on a centralized service for the most part. And so to me, that's a great way to find opportunities to use tools that align with our ideals within the software and make AI available to our users. Yeah, so I'm definitely pro considering those. But that said, again, doesn't mean we should close the door on other non-open source versions. Perhaps we have plugins, right, that they can submit to the directory, that they can purchase their own access token. But generally, I'm anti anything that requires a token or a paid plan in core itself. And so I think those are a great way to make AI more accessible to the 43% of the web that uses WordPress. Yeah. Yeah.
Do you think it's possible, or AI is a threat to developers in the future?
Yes. So I was having some interesting conversations this week, and one of them was someone that they help mentor kids that are interested in coding into how to prepare themselves for opportunities out there. And so I worry about them. I also worry about, and I'll come back to how we can address it, but I also worry about the people that have already committed to degrees in the field. And those jobs have dried up, those entry-level jobs. And so I think that we need to think more carefully about what we're replacing when we introduce these tools, because the result right now is we're replacing a lot of junior-level positions. But there will come a time where all of a sudden there's no more senior-level people because they're not starting off and learning and getting experience, or they will be there as senior level, but they will have a huge blind spot in their experience. And so I think that's part of what being thoughtful is, not just within your community, but as a whole in your trade and things of that nature. How are our decisions affecting that? And I think there will be some realization eventually that, you know, AI is really great. It can do some things really efficiently, but actually we're spending more time reviewing this junior level code from AI models than we are when we actually have physical junior developers that are being mentored by our senior staff. And in my eyes, it's a future risk and liability to be cutting that out. And so I hope that soon we get to a point where we can realize that and fix it. The other aspect is that you can continue to learn great foundational skills like analytical thinking, how to make decisions, how to communicate properly, how to all of those things, how to have good foundational programming concepts. All those things will translate, and even when using AI, being able to express those things to the model could help you have a better effect in the end. So, it's kind of like writing. Everybody learns to write, and they might use it differently, but those are great skills to have anyway, even if you choose to pivot into another trade or another job in the end. So yes, but hopefully not for long, but also it might be different in a few years how those jobs fit in, yeah. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. I too am very excited about the future of AI with the concerns you've raised.